Nature's deadliest predators strike without warning, turning ordinary moments into seconds-long battles for survival. From the abandoned Sakhalin radar station, where a grizzly tore through a geological team in under 4 minutes, to the frozen Arctic inlet where a polar bear hunted a lone researcher, these 6 encounters reveal the raw, relentless power of wildlife. From tense standoffs in remote rivers to unexpected intrusions into homes and workplaces, in this video we'll dive into 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans. On the night of September 23, 2024, a 5-member geological team huddled inside an abandoned radar station deep in Sakhalin's interior, a relic of the Cold War surrounded by jagged steel towers and creeping mist that hung over the forest like a ghostly veil. The building's paint peeled in flakes, rust mottled the walls, and the scent of damp metal mixed with the faint tang of leftover fuel from decades-old generators lingering in the cold air. Dr. Pavel Novak, the expedition leader, had chosen the site for its isolation, believing it would allow uninterrupted geological readings, unaware that the stillness of the night concealed a predator's patience just beyond the concrete walls. Lena Hart, the youngest technician at 26, adjusted her flashlight on the cramped table where maps and instruments lay scattered, the beam trembling in her hands as she studied the readings from the last seismic drill. The mist pressed against the frosted windows like the breath of something alive. At precisely 3:12 a.m., a metallic crash shattered the silence, echoing through the corridors with sudden violence. The team froze, hearts pounding, before a deep, guttural roar tore through the station, vibrating the rusted walls. From a side door left slightly ajar, a massive grizzly bear, its fur dark and matted, emerged with terrifying force, drawn by the lingering scent of fuel and forgotten rations stacked in a corner. Its eyes, unyielding and black, scanned the room as it stepped over a shattered chair, muscles tightening with lethal intent. When the wind slammed the door behind it, the team's panic erupted into chaos. Flashlights jerked, metal clanged, and a single flare rolled across the floor, igniting the linoleum in a burst of flame. Dr. Novak barely had time to react before the bear lunged. Its enormous paw slammed him against a console, the impact snapping ribs and twisting his body in unnatural ways. Lena dove beneath a bunk, pressing herself into the narrow shadow as she watched the carnage unfold. The bear's massive bulk moved through the corridor with brutal precision, shattering instruments, splintering benches, and crushing anyone caught in its path. Her colleagues' cries rose briefly, only to be swallowed by the roar and the clatter of destruction. Time seemed to distort, seconds stretching into eternity as Lena's breath came fast and shallow. The acrid scent of burning fuel mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Technician Mikhail Ivanov was thrown across the room, the bear's weight pinning him to the floor as bones broke. Dr. Novak, barely conscious, tried to crawl toward the wall, but the bear's paw struck him again, flinging him into a heap of overturned tables and broken instruments. In another corridor, the creature's roar echoed like thunder as it dispatched the remaining team members, engineer Igor Belov and field assistant Katya Morozova, with terrifying speed and methodical precision. Lena's mind screamed for a plan. The rear hatch offered a slim chance of escape. She pressed herself lower, blood streaking her arms from the bear's earlier swipes. As the massive animal shifted toward her hiding place, she waited, heart pounding, calculating the instant she would need to move. When it turned away, distracted by the remnants of the others, she bolted. Sliding through the hatch into the freezing rain, she ran barefoot into the darkness, the wind cutting through her torn clothes, her feet burning against the frozen ground as she plunged into the mist-shrouded forest. Behind her, the roar faded, replaced by the howl of wind and the relentless drumming of rain. She ran until the trees began to thin and the faint sound of a river pulled her forward. Half-conscious, bloodied and exhausted, Lena collapsed on the muddy bank, her body trembling violently, adrenaline fading into cold paralysis. Her skin was cut and bruised, her clothes in tatters, yet she clung to consciousness as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Behind her, the radar station stood like a crumbling tomb, smoke curling from the flare fire, the echoes of violence still lingering in the air. The scent of fuel and blood hung heavy and unrelenting. By sunrise, rescue teams navigating the fog and rain found her barely coherent, shivering uncontrollably, the evidence of survival etched into every torn inch of fabric and every bruise on her body. 4 of her colleagues, Dr. Novak, Mikhail Ivanov, Igor Belov, and Katya Morozova, lay lifeless within the station, victims of an attack that lasted less than 4 minutes. The bear, driven away by the rising light and the distant hum of approaching helicopters, disappeared into the dense Sakhalin forests, leaving behind only devastation and the chilling reminder of nature's power. Weeks later, investigators recounted the scene with disbelief. The charred remnants of instruments, the blackened floors, the shredded equipment, and the unmistakable traces of violence that coated every surface. The smell of burned fuel still lingered when they arrived, mingling with the damp scent of pine and decay. What had once been a hub of scientific inquiry now resembled a ruin from another world, one where human order had briefly collided with primal chaos. Lena's account became one of survival against impossible odds. She described her escape as instinctive, almost dreamlike, the forest swallowing her whole as if shielding her from the nightmare behind. Specialists later noted that her endurance and timing had been the only reasons she survived, a narrow margin between instinct and chance. Her injuries were severe, yet she recovered, though the memory of that night left an indelible scar. The official report concluded that the bear had likely been drawn by a mixture of chemical odors, fuel, human scent, and stored food, exacerbated by the cold and the scarcity of prey that season. Experts speculated that its aggression may have been heightened by hunger and territorial instinct. Whatever the cause, the event became one of the most violent and incomprehensible wildlife attacks in the region's modern history. For months afterward, local authorities restricted access to the interior forests, warning that the bear might still roam nearby. The old radar station, blackened and silent, was later sealed off entirely. Only the rusted towers remained visible above the treetops, jutting through the mist like monuments to the night's terror. The following spring, Lena returned once more, standing at the riverbank where she had collapsed months before. The forest was green again, the air filled with birdsong and the scent of wet soil, yet the silence between the trees felt the same, watchful, ancient, and alive. Though she said little, those with her noted how long she stared toward the ruins beyond the mist, as if listening for the echoes of what had happened. The tragedy became a quiet legend among researchers and locals alike, a cautionary tale of nature's unpredictability and the thin boundary between human control and the wild. The radar station decayed further with each passing year, its story fading into rumor, yet the memory of that night remained vivid for those who had seen its aftermath. A reminder that even in an age of technology and precision, the wilderness still holds forces far beyond human understanding. On the morning of July 19, 2025, Dylan Reeves, a 29-year-old wildlife researcher with years of field experience on Kodiak Island, set out to continue his long-term tracking study of the island's massive bear population. He carried camera traps, scent markers, and a field notebook sealed in a waterproof pack. Rain fell steadily, soaking the dense green forest and slick undergrowth, while low fog clung to the mountainsides, obscuring the ridges in a dull gray haze. The river ahead, shallow yet deceptively swift, cut through the landscape like a silver vein, swollen with early summer runoff and the scent of spawning salmon that hung heavy in the air. The odor drew predators from the surrounding forest, keeping every traveler cautious. Dylan paused at the bank, scanning the water and judging the current with the precision of someone who had learned caution from experience. The tripod and gear were heavy in his hands, each step a careful negotiation with the unstable, muddy ground that threatened to give way beneath his boots. By 7:32 a.m., he began to wade into the torrent. The icy water pressed against his knees and tugged at his boots, threatening to sweep him off balance. He placed each step deliberately, forcing his movements into rhythm with the current as the tripod clanged softly against his leg. The wind carried the faint, musky scent of wet fur, earth, and decaying salmon, an invisible warning that he was stepping into territory ruled by creatures far stronger than himself. Halfway across, the water swirling around his legs, Dylan froze. A deep guttural grunt rolled through the trees behind him, cutting through the sound of rushing water and steady rainfall. His pulse spiked. The forest around him seemed to contract, every sound sharpening. He turned his head slowly toward the opposite bank, instincts alert, muscles tight with the awareness of being watched. From the tree line, a massive Kodiak bear emerged, stepping into the shallows. Water streamed from its thick, dark fur, muscles shifting beneath the surface with a fluid power that dwarfed anything human. The animal waded forward with deliberate calm, each step a quiet assertion of dominance. Its eyes, black and unflinching, locked onto Dylan with unsettling focus. Curiosity and caution mingled with something deeper, older, instinctual. The bear moved slowly but with intent, the current swirling helplessly around its enormous frame as it advanced. Dylan's boots slipped on the slick stones. He tightened his grip on the tripod, knowing it was useless as a defense but needing something to anchor himself. Every muscle screamed for movement, yet he knew that any sudden motion could trigger a fatal reaction. The bear continued forward until only 10 meters separated them. The roar of the river and the hiss of rain faded beneath the hum of tension. Dylan's breathing grew shallow, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of fear. The bear halted. It sank slightly as it planted its paws, head low, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. The two locked in a silent standoff, the river between them rippling with reflected gray light. Seconds stretched like hours. Dylan's mind worked furiously through every protocol he had ever learned. Remain calm, avoid direct challenge, do not run. His body trembled with cold and adrenaline, the current pushing against him like a living force. But he stayed still, heart hammering as rain traced icy lines down his face. For long moments neither moved. The bear's gaze remained fixed, reading every flicker of motion, every breath. Dylan felt time lose shape, his thoughts narrowing to the pulse in his throat and the steady rhythm of the creature's breathing. The air between them seemed to hum with the tension of survival itself, one life balanced against another's patience. Then, slowly, the bear lowered its head toward the water. With a single, deliberate motion, it hooked a salmon carcass from the shallows, jaws snapping shut around the slippery body. Its eyes flicked toward Dylan once more, unreadable, before it turned and retreated into the forest, each step measured and silent. The sound of splashing faded until only the rush of the river remained. Dylan stood frozen, unable to move until the bear had vanished completely. When his legs finally gave way, he sank to his knees in the cold water, breath shuddering from his chest, heart pounding so hard he could feel it echo in his ears. The tripod slipped from his grip and clattered against the rocks, but he barely noticed. Relief and disbelief flooded him in equal measure. He had survived an encounter that could have ended in seconds. When he finally reached the far bank, he collapsed onto the slick stones, soaked and shaking. His hands were scraped raw. His clothing clung to his body, and every nerve still buzzed with the aftershock of fear. The river continued to roar beside him, carrying the faint scent of wet fur and salmon downstream. Around him, the forest exhaled into silence, the mist curling once more between the trunks, as if nothing had happened. Later that day, when he set up his camera traps and opened his notebook to record the details, the scene replayed in his mind with perfect clarity. The deliberate pace of the bear, the weight of its stare, the quiet intelligence behind its movements. He wrote every detail with precision, aware that such an encounter could never truly be captured in words. The event had not been a confrontation, but a mutual recognition, predator and human meeting at the narrow edge where instinct and awareness intersect. Dylan understood that his survival had hinged on restraint, timing, and respect. The core principles every wildlife researcher learns but rarely experiences so viscerally. The bear's power had been absolute, yet it had chosen to disengage, leaving him not victorious but humbled. As dusk settled over the forest, Dylan paused beside his tent, staring toward the dark line of trees that hid the river. The memory of the encounter remained vivid, the gleam of wet fur, the sound of heavy paws shifting through the current, the silence that followed. The forest around him pulsed with life, calm again, yet the balance between calm and chaos felt thinner than ever. That night, as rain drummed softly on the canvas and the distant river murmured through the fog, Dylan realized that the day's events would stay with him for the rest of his life. He had stood within arm's reach of the wild's raw authority and emerged unscathed, not through strength but through stillness. The boundary between researcher and wildlife, between curiosity and danger, had blurred into something elemental, a moment of understanding that could never be replicated, only remembered. On the morning of September 5th, 2023, before the first light of dawn touched the horizon, farmer Ben Calloway moved through his apple orchard, the earth damp with early autumn dew and the air thick with the sweet, heady scent of ripening fruit hanging in heavy clusters from bowed branches. Rows of trees disappeared into fog, their leaves glittering with moisture and rustling faintly in a cold breeze that carried the earthy aroma of compost and the faint tang of fertilized soil. Ben, 52, and seasoned by decades of tending orchards in northern Washington, carried a worn rake and a small tool bag over one shoulder. His practiced eyes scanned the ground for fallen fruit and signs of rot, unaware that the calm, pre-dawn stillness concealed a predator waiting in the mist. Near the orchard's edge, beside a compost heap piled high with decomposing apples and garden scraps, a flicker of movement caught his attention. Something shifted within the fog, a dark, hulking shape that moved with unsettling purpose. At first he assumed it was a stray dog or raccoon, But as his eyes adjusted, the outline resolved into something far larger. A black bear, thick-furred and powerful, was rummaging through the heap, snapping its jaws over fruit and pawing at the soil with deliberate force. Its coat, damp and matted with leaves, glistened in the dim light as it rooted through the compost, utterly indifferent to the nearby human presence. Instinct took over. Ben shouted and slammed his shovel against a metal barrel, the metallic clang echoing down the rows of trees. He expected the bear to retreat, startled by the noise. Instead, the response was immediate and menacing. The animal froze, then turned, its ears flattening against its skull. Steam rose from its nostrils as it fixed him with dark, unblinking eyes. In a single fluid motion, it charged, the ground trembling under its weight. The impact came like a storm. Ben barely had time to move before the bear struck, knocking him to the ground. The soil gave beneath their combined weight, the air filling with the scent of crushed apples and earth. Claws tore through his sleeve, pain burning across his forearm as he rolled, dirt and dew mixing with blood. Gasping, he scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, and sprinted toward the old tractor parked at the orchard's edge, desperation overtaking reason. Snatching up a fallen branch, he swung wildly, connecting with the bear's shoulder. The animal snarled, swiping as it lunged again, claws grazing his upper arm and ripping through fabric, leaving vivid red streaks across his skin. He reached the tractor, fumbling with the ignition. The machine groaned but refused to start, the mechanical failure amplifying his terror. The bear's heavy steps approached, the sound of its breathing merging with the hiss of fog and wind. Ben backed away, boots sliding on wet leaves, every nerve screaming for escape. The animal paused, sniffing the air, head tilting slightly as it gauged him, a hunter calculating whether to strike again. With shaking hands, Ben tore open his tool bag and grabbed a flare. It sparked on the first strike, bursting into a hiss of blinding orange light and acrid smoke. The flare's glow cast shifting shadows across the orchard, reflecting off the bear's dark eyes. The creature flinched, uncertain, its muscles coiled. Then, with a deep snort that broke through the hiss of flame, it stepped backward, eyes fixed on Ben until it finally turned and vanished into the tree line. Only the faint rustle of underbrush marked its retreat. For a long moment, Ben stood frozen, the flare sputtering in his trembling hand. The world around him seemed suspended between silence and disbelief. When the flare finally died, he collapsed against the overturned tractor, chest heaving, limbs shaking uncontrollably. His breath came in ragged bursts, the air thick with the mingled scents of smoke, blood, and crushed fruit. The orchard slowly reclaimed its stillness, but the weight of the encounter hung heavy in the air. Minutes passed before his pulse began to steady. The early light of morning crept across the orchard, illuminating the aftermath. Flattened apples, torn branches, deep claw marks in the soil. The evidence of the struggle looked surreal in the soft dawn light. Each broken stem and muddy print a reminder of how quickly routine could turn to survival. When neighbors arrived later that morning, drawn by the fading smoke and echoes of shouting, they found Ben slumped beside the tractor, his clothes torn and streaked with dirt and blood. His hands shook violently as he gestured toward the forest, trying to describe what had happened. The story emerged in fragments. Noise, movement, the bear, the flare. His expression carried the shock of someone who had seen nature's power at its most intimate and brutal. The orchard, once a place of calm labor, now bore scars of chaos. Overturned soil, shredded bark, and paw prints the size of plates pressed deep into the damp ground. The bear had vanished, but its presence lingered in every broken stem and in the smell of fear that clung to the air. Over the next few days, sightings never materialized, though tracks occasionally appeared along the property's edge, and several rows of trees were found stripped of fruit. Wildlife officials later suggested the bear had likely wandered deeper into the forest, drawn by the last remnants of the harvest. Ben, however, continued to glance toward the tree line each morning before work, half expecting to see movement in the fog again. The encounter changed him. What had been routine, the early walks, the sound of rustling leaves, the faint crunch of soil beneath his boots, now carried new tension. He still tended the orchard, still harvested the fruit, but each day began with a quiet acknowledgement of risk. He repaired the fence, moved compost piles farther from the trees, and kept flares within reach. The memory of the bear's eyes and the force of its charge stayed with him, vivid and permanent, a reminder that the boundary between order and chaos could vanish in an instant. In time, the orchard recovered. The bruised earth softened under new grass, and the trees bore fruit again. But to those who visited, Ben's story lingered like local legend, a tale told in the same hushed tones reserved for storms and near misses. They spoke of the morning fog, the roar that shattered the stillness, and the man who had stood his ground beneath the apple trees, armed with nothing but a flare and instinct. For Ben, it was not a tale of heroism, but survival, a testament to the fragile balance between human control and the wild forces that surround it. On the night of November 12, 2021, the small Montana town of Red Pine rested beneath a sky streaked with low clouds, late autumn winds cutting through narrow streets and carrying the mingled scent of decaying leaves, pine needles, and distant wood smoke. At the edge of town, the modest police station stood against the forest line, a squat brick building with fading paint and a cluttered rear lot, its proximity to wilderness reminding officers that civilization here was fragile, temporary. Officer Ryan Cooper, 28 and 3 years on the job, worked alone just after midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered above his desk as he typed a report on missing dogs and damaged fences, routine signs of wildlife encroachment that had lately unsettled residents. Occasionally, he glanced at the dark windows that mirrored his own tired reflection, faint streetlight glints breaking the stillness outside. A sudden metallic thud against the back wall jolted him upright, the sound sharp and unnatural in the quiet. Instinct took hold. Grabbing his flashlight, Cooper stepped into the cold air. Wind tugged at his jacket, bringing with it damp earth, pine resin, and a faint animal musk that made his pulse quicken. The beam of his light cut through the darkness and landed on two golden eyes shining from behind a dumpster, low to the ground, unwavering. The shape that followed drew the air from his chest, a grizzly bear, gaunt and restless, its fur matted and dull, muscles moving like cables under its hide. Hunger radiated from its deliberate stalking gait as it advanced, drawn by the scent of discarded food lingering from late-night meals. Before Cooper could retreat, the bear lunged with stunning speed. Its paws struck the asphalt in thunderous rhythm before the full weight slammed into him, knocking him back against the patrol car. Pain exploded across his shoulder, and breath fled his lungs before he could reach his weapon. The taste of iron filled his mouth as he pushed himself upright, adrenaline burning through every nerve. Inside the station, dispatcher Ellen Pike sat at her desk when the crash echoed through the hall. The side door splintered, scattering papers and debris as the bear forced its head and shoulders through the frame, claws tearing wood and metal alike. The sight froze her, the animal's power overwhelming the fragile human space it had invaded. Outside, Cooper steadied his stance and drew his sidearm. Two shots cracked through the night, the echoes rolling against the brick walls. The first bullet grazed the bear's shoulder, drawing a low, guttural sound. The second struck deeper, staining its fur with dark streaks. The bear reared up, nostrils flaring, then hesitated, instinct momentarily overcoming hunger. With a huff that steamed in the cold air, it turned and bounded into the trees, swallowed by darkness and wind. For long seconds, silence reigned. The faint ring of spent gunfire hung in the air as Cooper and Pike stared across the wrecked office. Dust and papers drifted through the beam of the overhead light. Filing cabinets lay twisted, chairs overturned, and claw marks scored the walls and floors. The once orderly space now felt exposed, a reminder that no amount of authority could hold back the wild. Cooper braced himself against the doorframe, straining to hear movement beyond the parking lot. Only the sigh of wind and the rustle of trees answered, carrying the faintest trace of the bear's retreat into the night. By dawn, wildlife officers arrived, moving carefully through the debris in the frost-covered lot. They measured paw prints sunk deep into the soil and asphalt, each over 16 inches long, and noted the marks where claws had gouged through wood and metal. Their report confirmed what the encounter had already proved. The grizzly was massive, likely more than 900 pounds, scarred from old wounds and driven by hunger to test the boundaries between wilderness and habitation. It was a creature pressed to survive the coming winter, intelligent and unafraid. The officials warned that the bear might linger near the outskirts of Red Pine, scavenging where food was easiest to find. For those who lived there, it was a sober reminder that the forest was never far away and never truly tamed. Cooper, bandaged and bruised, replayed the moments in relentless clarity. The reflection of golden eyes in the beam of his flashlight, the crushing impact, the sheer power that had thrown him like a rag doll, and the chaos of clawed wood and shattered equipment. Each recollection blurred the boundary between fear and fascination. The bear had not simply attacked. It had reminded him of the fragility that existed beneath the illusion of control. Even weeks later, new snow revealed occasional prints near the forest's edge, large and unmistakable. Each sighting reignited the memory, an unspoken acknowledgement that the animal still moved somewhere beyond the trees, patient and watchful. The station required weeks of repair. Doors were replaced, walls patched, and shattered furniture cleared away, though the faint scent of pine and gunpowder lingered. Within the department, the story became a cautionary legend, retold with awe and disbelief. The night a grizzly breached the walls of a police station, scattering papers and pride alike. To the residents of Red Pine, it became part of local lore. Around diner counters and over late-night radios, people spoke of the bear that charged through brick and metal, a creature of hunger and power that reminded them of where they lived, on the thin line between wilderness and order. For Officer Cooper, the lesson endured in quieter ways. Each shift that began beneath the flickering office lights carried the memory of that night, the smell of cold air and fear, the echo of claws against the floor, and the sight of the forest just beyond the window, vast, silent, and indifferent to human boundaries. On August 21, 2025, Liam Parker, a seasoned 36-year-old hunter from Anchorage, guided his 12-year-old son Noah and their black Labrador Scout along a narrow, overgrown trail deep in Alaska's interior. The forest surrounded them in a maze of towering spruce and hemlock, sunlight filtering through the canopy in scattered beams that caught floating motes of dust and mist. The air carried the scent of damp soil, decaying salmon, and sharp pine resin, a potent mix that marked the wilderness as both beautiful and unforgiving. Liam moved with the quiet confidence of experience. Years of tracking and hunting had etched knowledge into his every motion, yet even his familiarity with the land could not remove the unease that lingered in terrain ruled by predators. He scanned the ground constantly, eyes catching broken branches and disturbed brush, signs of recent animal movement, while Scout padded ahead, ears twitching at distant sounds. Then he saw them, paw prints pressed deep into the soft mud, enormous in size, claws leaving clean, curved impressions that spoke of immense power. Liam knelt, tracing one with his gloved hand, his stomach tightening as he gauged their size and freshness. The tracks led toward a dense thicket by a creek bed, where silence hung heavy, a silence that spoke of unseen eyes and held breath. He motioned for Noah to stay close and advanced slowly, rifle raised, every instinct sharpening. The stillness broke with an explosion of motion. From the thicket, a massive grizzly erupted, fur glistening with dew, muscles rippling beneath the thick coat. Its roar tore through the forest, a deep, primal sound that vibrated in Liam's chest and froze the air. He reacted instantly, raising his rifle, but the bear struck before he could fire, one sweeping paw sending the weapon spinning into the brush. The metallic clang rang out across the valley before being swallowed by the roar of chaos. Instinct took over. Liam sprinted toward a nearby spruce and began climbing, bark tearing beneath his hands, Scout's furious barking echoing below. The bear reared, towering over them, claws raking the trunk and stripping away bark as it shook the tree with terrifying force. Liam's arms trembled as he climbed higher, the trunk vibrating under the bear's weight, every muscle straining against gravity and fear. Then his grip failed. His boots slipped against slick wood, and in an instant he fell. The impact drove the breath from his lungs, and before he could move, the bear descended upon him with brutal efficiency. Its claws tore through his jacket and flesh, its massive weight crushing him into the earth. Pain flared through his body, his mind caught between instinct and disbelief as he struggled against power beyond human measure. Noah froze, paralyzed by the sight. Scout lunged, barking and snapping at the bear's legs, darting in and out with frantic courage, but his small size made little difference. The bear ignored him, intent on the figure beneath its claws. The air filled with the chaos of snapping branches, pounding paws, and the ragged rhythm of panic and survival. For Noah, the moment stretched endlessly, the world reduced to sound, movement, and the primal violence of nature unleashed. When the forest finally fell silent, the clearing was still except for the shallow panting of the dog and the trembling breaths of a terrified child. Hours later, as darkness settled and the wind stirred the treetops, rescue teams traced the signal from Liam's emergency beacon, activated during the struggle. Their flashlights swept over a scene that told the story in silence: torn earth, blood-soaked soil, and crushed branches where the fight had ended. Liam lay motionless beneath the spruce, his body still and broken. Scout crouched nearby, trembling but alive, his fur streaked with mud and blood, eyes fixed on the rescuers with wary recognition. Noah was found a short distance away beneath a tangle of fallen brush, shaking and pale, his face streaked with tears and dirt. The rescuers approached carefully, their voices low, aware that the bear could still be near. Deep tracks in the mud, broad, deliberate, and heavy, marked its path back into the forest, leaving behind only the aftermath of its dominance. The boy clung to the officer who lifted him from the brush, while Scout remained close, shivering but alert, still guarding the spot where his master had fallen. The rescuers worked quietly, their movements methodical, their faces set in grim understanding. In the wilderness, even experience could not guarantee control. Liam Parker's death sent ripples through Alaska's hunting community. Those who had long trusted their instincts in the field were reminded of how narrow the line between control and catastrophe could be. The forest had shown its indifference once more, reclaiming its power in a single violent instant. For Noah, the memory of that day became unshakable. The smell of pine and blood, the thunder of paws, and the echo of his father's warning lost beneath the bear's roar. Scout's loyalty, fierce and desperate, was a fragile light amid the horror, a symbol of devotion that endured even as the wild took its toll. In the months that followed, search teams tracked the bear through the region, finding traces but never recapturing it. Hunters spoke of massive tracks, seen near creek beds and salmon runs, always vanishing before daylight. To those who lived close to the wilderness, the story of Liam Parker and his son became a lesson retold with quiet reverence. It reminded them that in the untamed reaches of Alaska, respect and caution were not optional. They were survival itself. The wild did not bend to skill or experience. It demanded humility, and for those who entered it, as Liam had, the price of forgetting that truth could be measured in heartbeats. On February 18, 2025, wildlife researcher Mia Carter, 28, navigated a narrow corridor of ice along a frozen Arctic inlet, the snowmobile engine thrumming beneath her as she monitored seal dens and recorded ice conditions for an ongoing climate study. The low winter sun barely cleared the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across brittle ice that glinted like glass under a merciless light. Every gust sent fine snow into her goggles, while the air carried the tang of salt, frozen fish, and seaweed from nearby tide cracks, a harsh reminder of how alive and unforgiving this place remained. Each turn demanded focus, the thin ice and patches of open water threatening to give way beneath her at any moment. Her pack, stuffed with field notes, rations, and cameras, pressed against her back, its weight a constant reminder that every movement counted. Cresting a ridge of jagged ice, she scanned the floes for signs of seal activity. Frost gathered along her sleeves and scarf as she steadied her hands on the handlebars, eyes flicking between the frozen horizon and the dim glow of her GPS. The Arctic could shift from stillness to chaos in seconds. Even the smallest sound, a cracking sheet of ice, a distant gull's cry, might conceal something far worse. Then, over the ridge, movement. A polar bear emerged from the shimmer of the horizon, massive and deliberate, fur white against the blue shadow of the ice, its eyes fixed on her, sharp and intelligent, drawn by the faint scent of her stored food cache. It descended the ridge with unnerving speed, paws slamming into the surface and sending shards of snow into the air. Mia slammed the brakes, the snowmobile fishtailing on slick ice before throwing her sideways. She hit hard, pain shooting through her shoulder and hip as the cold bit into her soaked clothes. The snowmobile spun to a stop, metal groaning as the bear lunged, one massive paw crushing the handlebars in a single blow. Her helmet skidded across the ice with a metallic clang that echoed through the empty expanse. Instinct took over. She rolled behind a small snowbank, body rigid with adrenaline, muscles coiled and trembling. The bear prowled closer, its breath visible in clouds, each exhale low and resonant. Paws cracked the ice beneath its weight as it investigated the wrecked snowmobile, claws leaving deep curved scars in the frozen surface. Its growls rolled across the inlet, low, guttural, and patient, probing the air for movement. Mia pressed herself deeper into the drift, breath shallow, frost forming along her eyelashes. She counted seconds, forcing her pulse to slow as she studied the bear's behavior, every nerve tuned to the rhythm of its steps. The Arctic felt suspended in silence except for the wind and the creak of shifting ice. Each moment could have ended in violence. Finally, after endless minutes, the bear's attention shifted. Lowering its head, it dragged a seal carcass from a nearby ridge, shaking it with primal force before retreating, its massive form shrinking into the white horizon. The sound of cracking ice faded with its departure, leaving only the whisper of wind. Mia remained still until the landscape settled again, then pushed herself upright, limbs stiff and shaking. her body a map of bruises and frostbite beginning to burn. She crawled to the damaged snowmobile, inspecting the bent handlebars and scattered tools. The machine was barely functional, but it was her only way out. After several desperate attempts, the engine sputtered, then roared to life. She swung into the seat, every muscle protesting, and accelerated toward the distant outline of the research station. The engine screamed against the brittle surface, tires catching on fractures in the ice as she fought to keep balance. Behind her, the empty expanse stretched silent and vast. The bear gone, but its presence carved into every mark in the snow. By the time she reached the safety of the outpost, the heater's warm air hit her like a wave. Her hands shook uncontrollably, fingertips burning as circulation returned. She sank onto the metal steps outside, helmet resting beside her, chest heaving as she watched the Arctic light fade into a dull blue twilight. The bear's tracks, deep and precise, were still visible along the inlet, evidence of a creature that ruled this landscape without question. Inside, the scent of fuel and heated metal filled the small lab. Mia began documenting the incident as her training dictated, her handwriting jagged from the lingering tremor in her hands. She recorded every detail: the bear's size, its gait, the distance of its charge, the damage to her equipment. But beneath the data, her words carried something else: a reverence for the animal's deliberate movements, the intelligence behind its eyes, and the raw balance of fear and wonder that defined survival in the Arctic. The snowmobile, though bent and battered, had carried her back, a fragile shield between human vulnerability and the wilderness's indifference. She noted in her report that the bear had not attacked out of aggression, but hunger, drawn to a scent it could not ignore. The incident, she wrote, underscored the thin line between control and catastrophe, between curiosity and mortality. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping across the ice and erasing her tracks. The Arctic reclaimed what it always had: silence, distance, and the certainty that survival here was borrowed, never earned. For Mia, the encounter became a lesson written into both memory and record. Respect the wild, understand its rhythms, and never forget that in this frozen expanse, even knowledge offers no true protection, only the chance to endure another day.